walk you through the Chapter 5 break-even problem. In this chapter, we have many equations we can use to find that break-even point. The first step is to understand what those variable costs are and those fixed costs are so that we can find our contribution margin. Those contribution margins are going to be very important in these next coming chapters, so make sure you know how to get there. In this problem, the first thing we want to do is find how to build a contribution format income statement. Again, remember I said that contribution margin is very important. That's because we use that for so many things that we make a contribution format income statement out of it. To do that, we just take our sales minus our variable costs. This is going to equal our contribution margin. We subtract out then our fixed costs, which will then equal our net income. By pulling apart these figures, we can easily find our break-even points. When we look at all of these problems, it's going to save you time in the long run to separate this out and find what these numbers are in total on a per unit basis and also as a percentage. So if we go through this example, you can see we need to first find sales. That last sentence under the bullet points tells us we want to charge $30 per person and we expect to sell 500 tickets. So in total, that would give me $15,000 in sales. On a per unit basis, it would be $30. And as a percentage, we always take this as a percentage of sales. So sales will always be 100%. For variable costs, these costs are anything you can put on a per unit basis and vary with the level of activity. So here we have that $7 per person and we have $3 for the programs and favors. So if I take that $10 and I look at the number of people I'm expecting and I multiply that out, my expected variable cost would be $5,000. On a per unit basis, that would be 10, and as a percentage of sales, it would be 33%, or 10 divided by 30. Then I can subtract these and find my contribution margin. In total is 10,000, per unit basis is 20, and a percentage is 67%. Again, anything as a percent is going to be divided by sales. So if I didn't want to subtract, I can also take my contribution margin per unit and divide by my sales. Your fixed costs also are given to you. I just have to add up all of those figures. And if I add them up right, let's see, 1,500, which I did not do ahead of time, 1,500, I have 500, I have 4,500, and then another 1,500. This is going to give me a total fixed cost of $8,000, which means my net income currently is $2,000. So I've added up everything that is not the variable cost and included it as fixed costs. Now we're going to use all of this information to find our break-even points. So this was part 1 of your example. I'm going to move part 2 right here so we can still see some of those figures. We want to compute the contribution margin per unit and the contribution margin ratio. Remember, your contribution margin is just your sales minus your variable cost. So we've actually already done this. If you look, our per unit cost is 20, and as a ratio is 67. We've already done this piece of it just by kind of breaking these things out. But to give you those equations on a per unit basis, we can do sales minus variable cost. If we want it on a percentage basis, we can take our contribution to find that ratio. We can take our contribution margin and divide that by sales. But if we've done our work to begin with, we already have these figures. I'm going to use these figures to find those break-even points. So for number 3, they want us to determine our break-even in both units and as in dollars. One thing to remember, when I want to find units, I'm going to use my per unit. If I want to find dollars, I am going to use my ratio, or my contribution margin ratio. When I look at break even, my total formula is sales minus variable cost minus fixed cost. And at break even, I'm not making anything, so my net income is 0. If I set this to 0, that would give me my break-even point. Now, based on the information that's given to you, this may be difficult to do. So there's some shortcuts. If I want break-even to break even, and I look back to my formula here, if this was set to 0, that's my break-even point, right? That means that my contribution margin would have to equal my fixed cost in order for that to be 0. So when I look to my break-even point, I need to cover my fixed costs. If I look at it in units, I could take my fixed cost and divide by my contribution margin per unit. And that will give me my break-even in units. So let's use our information here and figure that out. If my fixed costs were $8,000, my contribution margin per unit is 20. That gives me a break-even in units of 400. On a ratio basis, I'm going to find my dollar amount I need to break even. I'm going to take my fixed cost and I'm going to divide that by my ratio to get my break even in dollars. So let's try that with this problem. Those fixed costs don't change. I'm going to divide by my ratio, which is 67%. And because that's an odd number, it doesn't come out very evenly. But I know it's 12,000. I know that because my break-even in units was 400 and my selling price is 30. That gives me that 12,000. And because of that point, repeating 7, it doesn't break out perfectly. So let's look then at number 4. Number 4 is saying, I don't want to break even, I want to make some money. What do I have to do? To find out how much you have to make, and here they just are looking at units, I would take my fixed cost, I'm going to add that target profit, and still divide by my contribution margin per unit. This will tell me how many units I need to sell to earn that target profit. here I have that 8,000. I want to make 5,000, and I'm going to divide by 20. So if I take that 8,000 and 5,000, which is 13,000, and I'm going to divide by my contribution margin per unit, it's going to tell me I have to sell 650 units to earn that $5,000. Now, let's take a look at margin of safety. Margin of safety is how much cushion you have to break even. So to find that margin of safety, it is your sales minus your break-even point. So in this example, if I know I'm going to sell 650 units, they each cost $30, that's going to give me a sales of $19,500. I'll bring that down here. I found out my break-even point was 12,000, which means my margin of safety in dollars is 7,500. If I want to look at this as a percentage, I would just take that 7,500 and I would divide by 19,500. So I'm going to take my margin of safety in units and divide by those sales, and that will give me the percentage I need, which is about 38%. So that will give you an example of how to find all the necessary equations, how to use all the necessary equations and find the necessary information in this chapter. Let me know if you've got questions.